Hey there, I'm Jackie Ferris. This week on the 302, we are at the historic Amstel house in Newcastle. Now, back in the day, this house was the envy of everyone in the area. Today, we're going to take a step back in time and take a tour of this historic home. Get ready, the 302 is going to dazzle you straight ahead. It's considered by some to be the crown jewel of Newcastle. I'm talking, of course, about the Amstel house. And we're here with the Newcastle Historical Society Executive Director, Mike Connolly, to take a little tour and learn more about this really beautiful historic house. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Thanks very much for joining me.
So tell us a little bit about the history of the house.
Sure. Well, the Amstel house goes back all the way to 1738. And just to put that in context for you, George Washington was 6 years old at the time that this house was built. It was built by a man named John Finney, who was an Irish immigrant. He was a professional man. He was a doctor. And when he arrived in Newcastle, he made money the best way he could at that point, which was by marrying a rich young lady. So in the 18th century, the way the laws worked, when a woman got married, she unfortunately gave up all of her wealth and her legal rights upon marriage to her husband. So Finney became quite wealthy quite quickly, and the couple started to purchase a lot of land around town. The one thing they did not have, though, was a really fine mansion. So they ended up building this, which we call the Amstel House, 1738, and it was built in the finest architecture of the time, which we call Georgian architecture. So it's pretty much what most people think of as colonial architecture. And ever since then, the house has gone through a lot of changes. A lot of different families have lived here, but it's also witnessed a lot of history, both the beginnings of Delaware and beginnings of the United States. So there's lots of stories to tell here at the Amstel house.
So this was the nicest house in the area for quite a while. And you can tell just by looking around, you know, the windows and the crown molding, just how much care and craftsmanship. This must have been the envy of everyone in the area.
I think it probably was, and I think that's exactly what Dr. Finney and then later on Nicholas Van Dyke, who lived here, I think that's exactly what they wanted people to feel when they walked in the house. They wanted to have the house and the furnishings and all the decorative things in the house really show that, hey, this is a house of some people that are very wealthy, they're very well educated, they're very well connected, and they're important in their community.
And when we look at the artifacts when we come for a visit, are they original to the families that lived here, or are they just from the era?
It's a mix, actually. And we mostly talk about the time surrounding the American Revolutionary War, from about the mid-1770s up until about 1790. And that's the time when the Van Dyke family is living here. And so a lot of our furnishings are directly related to and owned by the Van Dykes. Many of them were probably used in this house. They may have been used in some of their other properties too. And then when there are furnishings that are not directly related to the family, they're at least of the time period. So you'll get a real sense of what it was like to live during this time.
It's really amazing whenever you go into the parlor, you see the actual furniture that the family sat on, and it's in such amazing condition. It must take a lot of work to preserve such beautiful pieces.
It does, and of course we have the family to thank for a lot of that because they took care of it for so long. But then our role at the Historical Society is really to take care of the house and all the furnishings and artifacts that we have so they can be enjoyed and utilized by people in the future. So we do try and spend some time and effort and money on conservation of these artifacts so people can come in and kind of get a better understanding of their history and, you know, collectively our history as a state and as a country.
So part of the history of the area and of our country is connected to this house. There were a couple of governors and even a president came to visit Can you tell us about that?
Sure, yeah. Going back again to that time of the American Revolution, in 1775, 1776, Newcastle was really the capital of the colony and then eventually the state of Delaware. And it was also the site of the court, so there was a lot of really important things happening in Newcastle. And Nicholas Van Dyke was an attorney, and he was one of those founding father type of figures for Delaware and for the United States. He was in the Continental Congress, and he was on committees of safety, and very active as a rebel or a patriot, depending on your point of view, if you're British or American, during the American Revolution. So he lived here throughout the whole war. By 1783, he becomes elected to be the president of Delaware, which means he was the governor. So this is the governor's house, and I can just imagine so much information coming into the house, coming to Nicholas Van Dyke, who is probably responding to requests from George Washington for additional troops to be sent from Delaware, all sorts of things. And we're in the room which would have been Nicholas Van Dyke's office. So really, if these walls could talk, they would have some great stories to tell, absolutely. So Van Dyke was a governor. His granddaughter married a man named Thomas Stockton, who becomes governor of Delaware in 1840. And then the president that you were talking about that has a connection to our house is George Washington. He arrives to attend a party here at the Amstel house in 1784. So it's before he's actually elected president, but it's after he has his big win in the American Revolution. So he's definitely the most popular American at that time.
Now, we talked a little bit about the parlor, which is gorgeous with all of the dishes and just the way everything is set up. But tell us a little bit about the room that we're in now.
Sure. This is a room that I consider as a multi-purpose space. I refer to it as the second parlor typically, but it would have been used as an office. There was a doorway that went directly to the outside from this side of the room, so people could come in and out directly from the street to talk to Dr. Finney as a physician or to Governor Van Dyke. But then after the day's business is over, tables could be pulled out and set up here for dining space. In the evenings, the family could gather here and maybe read or socialize before they retired for the night. So.
And there's so much more to this house, and we're going to take a tour when we return.
Hi, I'm Debbie Buxton from Historic Odessa Foundation. Discover Delaware's best kept secret on the 302.
Welcome back. We have moved from the second parlor into the kitchen. Now, Mike, this is really an amazing space, especially when you consider this fireplace. Tell me about that.
Yeah, this is kind of Grand Central Station for the house. This is where everyone who works in the household, whether they're enslaved or indentured or hired workers, is going to spend a good deal of their time, mostly because of this fireplace. This is the main hearth, the main fireplace for the house. So this is where all those activities, notably cooking, of course, happening here, and baking. We do have a bake oven in the back. And then other types of tasks, candle making, laundry, heating up water for baths, that type of thing. It's all going to happen here in the kitchen. And there's going to be people coming in and going out as the household is readying things for the day. And if there's a special event, like a wedding, for example, or something, there's going to be a lot of activity happening in here for probably a week or more leading up to that event. And
it would be the warmest room in the house because of the fireplace, right?
It certainly would. This fireplace is going to pretty much be on 24/7 all year long. So if you can picture Delaware in August and this fire going, this is not going to be a place where you're going to want to spend most of your day.
Right. In January, though, you're all in. So
that's right.
Cooking back then is completely different than what we're used to now. So you guys explore that with programs, don't you?
We do. We just recently started what we call a historic foodways program. And the idea with the foodways program is to not only teach people how they cooked back then, just the mechanics of it, but also to really connect people with the folks that were working in this space. Because we talk all the time about the Van Dykes and the Finneys and the family that lives in the household, but a lot of the people that we forget about are the other people that are living and working in the household. So again, if they're enslaved and working here, we want to know about them. And so we can use the historic foodways to to reach them and tell their story, so people understand what their day-to-day life was like and what their contribution, what their legacy is to the house and to Newcastle.
Now you have some clothing on exhibit of someone who would be working in the kitchen.
Yes, we do. We have some 18th century reproduction clothing here, and it is really pretty typical of what a woman would wear if she was either middle class or lower class, working class woman in the 18th century. So, so nothing too fancy, nothing that isn't able to be dirtied up a little bit while working in the kitchen.
And able to be cleaned easily, I would imagine, as well. So let's talk a little bit about some of the items that are on the shelf. The jug at the top with all of the holes, what exactly is that?
Yeah, that is called a puzzle jug, and it's really probably more likely to be found in a tavern, but it's such a curiosity that we have it here at the Amstel house. And back in the 18th century and into the 19th century, if you were traveling along and you happened upon a tavern, you might find a local who would make a bet with you. And they would pull out that puzzle jug and they would suggest that there's no way that you can drink the alcohol that was in it without spilling it all over yourself, because the neck of the jug was perforated. But there is a secret to how to do it without spilling everything down your shirt. And that is to cover up all of the spouts up top except for one, and then use the final remaining spout as a straw. And as it turns out, the handle on the jug is hollow, so it will pull the liquid up for you and you can drink it safely that way.
That's amazing.
I was always told never to make a bet with somebody in a bar, though. So.
That's probably good advice. Good advice. Let's talk a little bit about the dishes that you have there. They're really, really unique. I don't think I've seen any like that before.
Yeah, most of the dishes are called redware, and they're a type of earthenware. They're ceramic, and they're very utilitarian. So they were something that was not too expensive to produce. We do have a lot of red clay in this area. As you mentioned, if you've been out and about in Newcastle, you see everything's made out of brick. It's much different than things that were being imported into China. So redware would be used more likely by middle-class folks, but when you are in the upper class, you want to try and show off some of those fine imported things. So you might import your china from the East or from Britain and use that instead.
We learned a word in a previous show, chinoiserie, for the various types of china. And so the red plates that you had mentioned were a departure from the Asian blue and white, the ginger jar that we call now that you have, not just here, but in other places around the house.
Yes, it is. It's those types of things were really meant to show off as well, because they were expensive and they were imported. So again, like the architecture of the house itself, it was a way for a family to show off some of their wealth and their status, and to really impress people if they're using those Chinese export porcelain pieces.
Now, you know what's really impressive is that copper kettle over there.
Yes, that is an apple butter kettle, and it's a little bit out of place here in the kitchen because it's really meant to be used outside in the kitchen yard. And what you would do is build a rather large fire under it. That's why it has such a large stand. And it comes with about a 12-foot stirring stick that you use to stir the apple butter while you're making it. And you need it to be about 12 feet long because that fire is really hot under there.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
And our tour of the Amstel house returns after this word.
Hi, I'm Jen Bowes, the Executive Director of the Greater Wilmington Convention and Visitors Bureau, and things are happening on the 302.
Welcome back. We have left the kitchen and come upstairs to the master bedroom. Now, Mike, this is bigger than I thought it was going to be, especially for the time. You think of older houses as having smaller rooms, but that's not the case here.
Yeah, definitely not. It's very spacious, I think, even for today's standards for bedrooms. It's got nice high ceilings, very nice woodwork, a lot of space for folks to not only spend their evenings, but you can spend all day up here. So they do bring up their food and their tea and things like that, and spend the afternoon in their bed chambers.
So let's talk a little bit about the bed itself and the quilt. I mean, really remarkable.
Yeah, the bed itself is probably about 1820. so it is an antique bed. The quilt is from the area, and it also dates to about 1820 to 1830. It's really remarkable in that it's all hand-stitched, and I just think of how much work it was for the folks to make something like this. But they obviously put a lot of care and love into it. So it was a communal effort and took a lot of time, but it really has stood the test of time now that it's 200 years old.
It certainly has. It's really gorgeous, as are a lot of pieces in this room. I wanted to ask you about the dressing table. You mentioned that some of the pieces in the house are original to the family.
Yeah, the dressing table belonged to Anne Van Dyke. She was Governor Nicholas Van Dyke's daughter. And so we can imagine her sitting at that dressing table and preparing herself for her big wedding day downstairs when George Washington attended.
And what about the music box on top?
The music box belonged to her daughter, Fidelia. So it's really interesting. It doesn't work at the moment, unfortunately, but there's a little label on it that has the playlist of the time. It was all of 4 songs, including the big hit, Hail Columbia. And so we compare and contrast that with children today when they come on school tours. We ask them how many songs they have on their phone, and of course they have thousands. So they try and put themselves in the place of Fidelia, who has to be stuck listening to the same 4 songs over and over and over again.
Well, I would imagine, though, that it was a luxury that a lot of kids didn't have, so she was probably pretty happy.
She definitely was. Yeah, not everybody could afford a music box, so she did have her music, and she could take it with her wherever she went.
Now, we do have 2 other people in the room in the pictures here. Tell us about the 2 people here in the portraits.
Sure. This is Kenzie Johns Sr. And Susanna Galloway Johns. And you may recognize the last name Johns if you know anything about Maryland history. Of course, in Baltimore, there is the Johns Hopkins University Medical Center, and that's the same family. They came from Annapolis. And Kenzie Johns married Anne Van Dyke, the governor's daughter. So it's kind of an illustration of how people in that social class, that upper social class, would network with each other, and they would intermarry. And again, that's kind of the way that they were able to keep and increase their wealth and their status in their communities.
So this room is part of the original building, the original home built in 1738, right? But there's another, I guess, addition, right?
Yes, that's right. Most of the Amstel house that people see when they come on tour is that 1738 building. There was a small addition that was put on around 1905, and that was when the family that was living here, the Hayes, decided that they wanted indoor plumbing. So that was, they put in indoor bathroom up here on the 2nd floor of the building, and then downstairs below it was a breakfast room right off the kitchen.
And soon after that, there was a big renovation. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. There was a local architect named Lestat Rogers who did a lot of work on the house. And it wasn't very long after that, after he restored it to sort of the colonial look, that the Historical Society was formed by a group of local people that decided that they really wanted to save the house.
So tell us a little bit about the Historical Society. You've come a long way.
We have. We were primarily here at the Amstel House, and we were formed in 1934. And this was our reason for being, was to take care of the house and open it to the public. Since then, we've had a couple of other buildings that we've started to use. We have the Dutch House Museum, and we also have the Old Library Museum here in Newcastle. So the Dutch House is like this. It's a little bit earlier. It's actually about 1700, but like the Amstel House, you can come and take a tour. The Old Library Museum is an 1892 building, so it's Victorian, a little bit different than these houses. And that's a space that we use for changing exhibits about Newcastle and Delaware history. So this year, starting in May, we're going to have an exhibit in the Old Library about travel in early America, basically from 1651 to 1851. So it should be interesting.
We'll have to come back and check that out. We only have a little more time left, but I wanted to ask you, tell us a little bit about the gardens, because there are some significant features to the garden outside.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for asking. Well, our gardens here at the Amstel House were designed back in the 1930s by a pretty noted landscape architect named Charles Gillette, and he was from Richmond, Virginia. And when the house was first being preserved and opened as a museum, it was decided that we really needed to have a colonial garden. Of course, what it is really a colonial revival garden. So the garden outside, while beautiful with boxwood and lovely brick pathways and even a tea house out back. That's not what it would have looked like in the 18th century. In the 18th century, it would have been a working yard. So it probably would have been mostly dirt with a big giant wood pile, an outhouse, probably a stable, probably a smelly, dirty place. But we actually rather like the colonial revival garden we have now.
Sure, sure. So if someone sees the show and wants to learn more about, the Amstel House or any of the other properties that the Historical Society takes care of, where can they go?
Sure. Probably the first place to go is to our website, newcastlehistory.org. But if they're already in Newcastle, they can come and see us over at the Visitor Center, which is in the building called the Arsenal. It's right on the green. Also, the address 30 Market Street.
Excellent. Mike, thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thanks for joining us. Really enjoyed it.
All righty. We'll be right back. For more information on the Amstel House, you can visit newcastlehistory.org. That'll do it for this week's episode of the 302. We're going to leave you now with some beauty shots around historic Newcastle. Until next time, I'm Jackie Ferris. Tell them you saw it on the 302.